She was the girl America trusted, the smile parents adored, the face that defined innocence on television screens across the nation. But behind that bright, unforgettable smile was a body slowly shutting down, a life quietly unraveling, and an ending shaped not only by disease, but by fear, smoke, and silent suffering. This is the story of Annette Funicello. Annette Joanne Funicello was born on October 22, 1942, in Utica, New York, to Italian-American parents, Joseph and Virginia Funicello. Her early life was simple, ordinary, and far removed from the bright lights of Hollywood. No one could have predicted that this young girl would one day become one of the most beloved faces in American entertainment history. Everything changed when her family relocated to Southern California while Annette was still a child. What seemed like a practical move would unknowingly place her at the center of destiny, waiting patiently to reveal itself. From a very young age, Annette possessed something rare. She didn't perform for attention. She didn't demand the spotlight. Instead, her warmth, sincerity, and natural charm drew people in without effort. Fame was never aggressively pursued by her family. In fact, it arrived almost by accident. In 1955, Annette attended a taping of The Mickey Mouse Club, a brand new Disney television program still in its infancy. She wasn't on stage, she wasn't auditioning, she was simply sitting in the audience. That was enough. Walt Disney noticed her. Among dozens of children, one young girl stood out. Her bright smile, expressive eyes, and unmistakable enthusiasm catching Disney's attention immediately. He saw something deeper than talent. He saw trust. He saw innocence that audiences would believe in. Unlike many child stars who were carefully groomed and pushed toward fame, Annette was personally chosen, not molded, not forced, chosen. She soon became one of the original Mouseketeers, and almost instantly one of the most beloved. In a cast overflowing with energy and personality, Annette didn't overpower the screen. She connected with it. Before long, she needed no last name. To millions of Americans, she was simply Annette. Fan mail arrived by the thousands every week. Her popularity soared far beyond expectations. Yet, remarkably, she remained grounded, protected by two forces that would shape her life: her parents and Walt Disney himself. Disney was determined that Annette would be shielded from the darker side of child stardom. He insisted on a clean, respectful image, guarding her from scandals and pressures that destroyed so many young performers of the era. Because of that protection, Annette grew up differently. She grew up safe, she grew up stable, and she grew up loved. As childhood faded and adolescence approached, Annette stood at the edge of her next transformation, unaware that while her star was rising, fate was quietly preparing a much darker chapter. As Annette grew older, the challenge was clear. Many child stars faded the moment childhood ended. Others collapsed under the weight of expectations. But Annette did something remarkably rare. She evolved. As her years on the Mickey Mouse Club came to an end, Annette transitioned into her teenage years with a grace that surprised even those closest to her. Instead of resisting change, she embraced it, gently, thoughtfully, and without rebellion. In the late 1950s, Annette reinvented herself once again, this time as a recording artist. Her voice wasn't powerful in the traditional sense. It didn't overwhelm, it didn't demand attention. Instead, it felt intimate, sincere, and emotionally honest. The songs like Tall Paul, First Name Initial, and Pineapple Princess captured the hearts of teenagers across America. Young fans didn't see Annette as a distant celebrity. They saw her as one of their own. She sang about crushes, longing, and young love with a softness that mirrored the emotions her audience was feeling themselves. Her music wasn't about rebellion, it was about innocence, vulnerability, and the quiet excitement of growing up. Once again, Annette became a sensation, but the 1960s would take her career in an entirely new direction, one that would define her image for decades to come. In the early 1960s, Annette Funicello became the undisputed queen of the beach party movie genre. Soaring opposite Frankie Avalon, she appeared in a string of colorful, carefree films that captured the spirit of American youth culture at the time. Movies like Beach Party, Muscle Beach Party, Bikini Beach, and Beach Blanket Bingo weren't meant to be deep or dramatic. They were joyful, playful, and sometimes delightfully absurd. Yet within that light-hearted world, Annette brought something real. She grounded the films emotionally. Her performances carried warmth and sincerity, preventing the stories from slipping into pure caricature. Audiences didn't just watch her, they trusted her. What made Annette even more remarkable was her unwavering sense of integrity. Despite the genre's increasing emphasis on revealing costumes, Annette famously refused to wear bikinis she felt were too provocative. This wasn't a publicity move, it was a personal promise, one she had made years earlier to Walt Disney. And she kept it. She understood her influence on young viewers and took that responsibility as seriously. In an era when many stars chased shock value, Annette chose consistency, values, and self-respect. Ironically, that restraint only made her more beloved. By the late 1960s, however, something subtle but profound began to shift. While her popularity remained as strong, Annette herself was changing. The spotlight that once felt exciting began to feel heavy, and quietly, almost unexpectedly, she began to step away. At a moment when most stars chase bigger roles, brighter lights, and louder applause, Annette did the unthinkable. She stepped back. By the late 1960s, Annette Funicello was still enormously popular. Her face was iconic. Her name was secure. Yet behind the scenes, her heart was no longer aligned with the life Hollywood demanded. In interviews, she spoke openly, almost dreamily, about a very different future. Not red carpets, not flashing cameras, but a quiet home filled with laughter, warmth, and children. She once joked that her ideal life included a simple house and 9 kids. To fans, this vision felt shocking. It stood in a stark contrast to the glamorous image they had grown accustomed to. But to Annette, it felt honest. Fame had given her success, but not peace. As her priorities shifted, her career choices followed. She became increasingly selective, choosing fewer film projects and allowing herself the freedom to live beyond constant production schedules. Then, after appearing in the 1968 counterculture film Head, Annette made a defining decision. She stepped away from major film roles almost entirely. What followed was not a short break, but a near 2-decade hiatus. An extraordinary move for someone whose popularity once seemed unstoppable. While many wondered why she had disappeared, Annette was quietly building the life she had always wanted, away from the spotlight, away from expectations, and closer to herself. When she finally returned to the big screen in 1987 with Back to the Beach, it didn't feel like a comeback. It felt like a reunion. Audiences welcomed her with warmth and nostalgia. she slipped effortlessly back into the beloved beach girl persona, this time with self-awareness, humor, and grace. It was proof that her star had never faded. It had simply rested. Even during her years away from film, Annette never vanished completely. She made occasional television appearances, always warmly received, introducing her to a new generation of viewers. From Pee-wee's Playhouse to family favorites like Full House, Growing Pains, and Lots of Luck, her presence felt familiar, like seeing an old friend. These appearances reinforced something powerful. Stepping away from Hollywood had not diminished her legacy. If anything, it had strengthened it. But while her career found balance, Annette's personal life was entering a new and deeply meaningful chapter, one defined by love, loyalty, and family. Long before the public knew her as America's sweetheart, Annette Funicello was simply a young woman longing for the stability, love, and a life that felt real. Away from the cameras and fan mail, Annette found that sense of grounding with Jack Gilardi. Their relationship grew steadily, quietly, and far from the constant noise of Hollywood. In 1965, they married, not as a publicity spectacle, but as two people choosing a future together. Their marriage lasted 16 years, a remarkable achievement during an era when fame often tore relationships apart. Together, they built a family and welcomed 3 children. For Annette, motherhood wasn't a role she balanced alongside her career. It became one of the most meaningful identities of her life. Being a mother gave her purpose beyond applause. It anchored her. It reminded her why stepping away from Hollywood had been the right choice. As her children grew, Annette willingly placed her career in the background whenever they needed her. The spotlight could wait, family could not. When her marriage eventually ended in 1981, Annette faced the transition with the same quiet dignity that had defined her entire life. There was no public bitterness, no scandal, only acceptance and forward movement. In the years that followed, love found her again, this time in an even quieter form. During the 1980s, Annette grew close to Glenn Holt, a respected racehorse trainer whose world revolved around patience, discipline, and care, qualities that mirrored her own. Their relationship began away from Hollywood entirely. No sets, no scripts, just companionship. They married in 1986, and Glenn would become her greatest source of strength during the most difficult chapter of her life. As Annette's health began to decline, he remained by her side, not as a caretaker alone, but as a devoted partner. Their marriage endured until her death, marked by loyalty, respect, and unwavering support. Beyond romance, Annette's life was enriched by friendships that lasted decades. One of her closest bonds was with fellow actress and singer Shelley Fabares. Their friendship began early in their careers and only deepened with time, providing comfort and understanding through both triumph and hardship. She also shared a tender, nostalgic connection with fellow Mouseketeer Lonnie Burr. In later years, Annette fondly recalled him as her first boyfriend, a sweet memory from a simpler time before adulthood complicated love. These relationships revealed the truth behind the public image. Annette wasn't just admired, she was cherished. But as the years passed, an unseen battle was already unfolding, one that would test her body, her independence, and her spirit in ways no audience could ever imagine. For decades, the world remembered Annette Funicello as the embodiment of sunshine and joy. Few realized that behind closed doors, she was already fighting a battle that would slowly take everything from her. In the late 1980s, Annette was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. At first, she chose silence, not out of shame, but out of love. She wanted to protect her family. She wanted to preserve normalcy, and she wasn't ready to let the illness define her identity. For years, she endured quietly as the disease progressed, its symptoms creeping forward with cruel unpredictability. Multiple sclerosis is relentless. It doesn't rush. It waits, and then it takes. Over time, Annette began to lose mobility. Tasks that were once effortless became exhausting. Walking grew difficult. Speech became strained. Independence slowly slipped away, piece by piece. Eventually, she could no longer walk without assistance. Later, even speaking clearly became a challenge, yet through it all, something remarkable remained unchanged: her spirit. When Annette finally chose to speak publicly about her condition, she did so with honesty and grace. She refused to let the illness define her worth. "I'm not ashamed of having MS," she once said. "It's just something that happened to me, and I'm dealing with it the best way I can." As the disease advanced, her world grew smaller, but her perspective grew deeper. She spoke often about gratitude, faith, and acceptance, not as slogans, but as survival tools. "I don't wake up every day and say, 'Oh my God, I have MS,'" she reflected. "I wake up and say, 'Thank you, Lord, for giving me another day.'" But in 2011, fate delivered one final and devastating blow. A fire broke out in her home. Annette was overcome by smoke and had to be rescued. She survived, but the damage was profound. Smoke inhalation placed immense strain on her already fragile respiratory and neurological systems. For someone living with advanced multiple sclerosis, the trauma was catastrophic. Though she escaped the flames, her body never truly recovered. Those close to her believed the incident accelerated her decline. While multiple sclerosis remained the underlying disease, the smoke exposure weakened her beyond repair, compounding years of suffering into an irreversible downward turn. Still, even as her body failed her, Annette never surrendered her dignity. She faced each day quietly, bravely, without bitterness. By the time of her passing on April 8, 2013, at the age of 70, Annette had long stepped away from public life, yet her influence had only grown stronger. She had become a symbol of resilience, an inspiration to countless people living with chronic illness. Her death was officially attributed to complications of multiple sclerosis, but those who knew her understood the truth. It was the cumulative weight of decades of illness, compounded by trauma, that finally brought her journey to an end. And still, her story was not one of defeat. It was one of courage. When Annette Funicello passed away, the world didn't just lose a former child star, it lost a symbol. Once the bright, smiling face of American innocence, Annette spent her final decades confronting a relentless illness that slowly stripped away her physical independence, but never her grace. Multiple sclerosis confined her body. It narrowed her world. It silenced her voice, but it could not erase who she was. Even as her speech faded and her movements disappeared, the warmth that defined Annette remained unmistakable to those closest to her. She faced unimaginable hardship, not with anger or despair, but with humility, faith, and quiet perseverance. The tragic circumstances surrounding her final years, when a smoke inhalation further weakened an already fragile body, underscored just how vulnerable she had become. Fate seemed cruel in its timing, compounding her suffering at the very end. Yet Annette did not pass as a victim. She passed as a woman who endured. Her life followed an extraordinary arc, from a child discovered by chance to a national icon, to a woman who willingly stepped away from fame in pursuit of family, peace, and meaning. In her own words, she once reflected, "Life doesn't always turn out the way you plan, but you do the best you can with what you're given." Those words now stand as her quiet farewell and her greatest lesson. Annette Funicello's legacy is not defined solely by television screens, movie posters, or chart-topping songs. It lives on in something far deeper, in courage without a spectacle, in dignity without applause, in strength that endured long after the spotlight faded. She reminded the world that even when the body fails, the human spirit can remain unbroken. And that may be the most powerful role she ever played.